Hello and welcome to the Hibs Observer post-match briefing on this Wednesday morning after Falkirk 2, Hibs 2 in the Scottish Premiership, a fourth draw consecutively for David Gray's side in the league. And again, conceding bad goals at bad times, throwing away a 2-goal lead. As the title says, grabbing a draw from the jaws of victory, which seems to be becoming a bit of an alarming trend at the moment, unfortunately. I'm here with Patrick McPartlin to go over last night's game, try and get to the bottom of it, see if we can plot a way forward for Hibs heading into some really big games now. But first of all, as always, just a wee word for our sponsor, the Hibs Observer, is brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV today. With thousands of jobs across Edinburgh and the surrounding area, you'll find the one at S1 Jobs, so start your search today. Patrick, oh dear.
Feels like a wee bit of an understatement, that. Yeah, I think after the performance on Saturday against Rangers, after everything David Gray said in his pre-match press conference on Monday, I think there was maybe, a general feeling amongst the support that things might be different in this game. And like Falkirk started very quickly. Hibs got, the penalty with a certain degree of fortune, and then a very good goal by Jamie McGrath. And you think, well, this could be things turning. And then it was almost like watching it happen in slow motion when they concede a goal in first half injury time. And you're kind of sitting there thinking, I can't believe this has happened again for the 7th time in competitive games so far this season. And at the same time, you're also thinking, this is exactly what I could have foreseen happening, because it's just, it just feels like one of those things now. It's like last season when it was, individual mistakes that were letting Hibs down. This time it just seems to be that wee period just before halftime, and there's that period after halftime as well. I think they've conceded, I can't exactly remember the numbers, maybe 3-4 goals in that sort of 5-10 minute period after halftime as well. And it's obviously really, really kind of hampering the team in terms of getting results, as we can see. The XG numbers last night was 2.45 expected goals, which is hardly surprising. You see how many chances Hibs had, and unfortunately how many chances they passed up. And I think the most concerning thing is that there was a lot of good bits in the first half. Pinging the ball around quite nicely, switching the play. Jamie McGrath took his goal well, as we said. They get the penalty, and it's almost like that, losing the goal just before halftime is just such a kick to the confidence. Because then, excuse me, we saw it on Saturday that they came out and they didn't really threaten in the second half. It was really passive. It was really kind of flat. And it was a bit like that again at the Falkirk Stadium last night, bar a kind of 5-minute spell right at the start of the half. Hibs kind of broke straight from kickoff, and Martin Boyle went down in the box. Might have been a penalty, but he was offside. And it was almost like from then on, just, I don't know, David Gray talked a lot about belief, and I don't feel the team had that belief. It's not just about belief, it's also about personnel. It's also about individuals not performing to their best, which I think we'll come on to a bit later. But, you go from thinking at 2-0 to Hibs, you think David Gray's talked about the mistakes, he's talked about where they need to improve, they've worked on the training ground, and, it's taken effect, to then thinking, if Falkirk had a more solid defence, they could have won that. And even if they didn't, they still could have won it. And that's concerning. That's a problem. And, especially with the 2 away games they've got coming up, Celtic and then Hearts, if Hibs kind of continue to play the way they have been playing, then you'd imagine both those teams would have a field day with the Hibs defence. And unfortunately, it seems like no matter who plays, in goals, who plays at right centre-back, left centre-back, whatever, wing-backs, it's been a problem that's not gone away. And I think, as well as having multiple opportunities in front of goal and not taking chances as much as they should, there's also this issue at the back. And yet somehow they remain unbeaten in the league, which is a very positive spin on 4 consecutive draws and 1 victory. But it's I think it's a confusing watch at the moment with Hibs. You're not really sure. You know what you're going to get, but you're not really sure what order you're going to get it in. And I mean, David Gray seemed quite kind of flummoxed by it last night. you look at the number of changes, like who's playing where, keeping Josh Mulligan at right wing back, bringing in Dan Berlasser, putting Rafael Salinger in goals. Even changing up the personnel isn't really having the desired effect. And again, something else we can talk about is the subs aren't having any impact either, really. Whether that's the timing, whether it's the positions they're being asked to play in, whether it's the tactics, I don't know. But we wrote last season about how David Gray had sort of, got really, really good luck almost with subs, where he was making the right subs at the right time. If that was bringing on Dwight Gale, if it was swapping Mikola Kurevic, Kieran Bowie, that sort of thing. And it was having a positive effect. And so far this season, I don't think we've really seen that. So kind of feels a bit like medieval times, and I've just like unrolled a massive scroll of issues. But I mean, that's what it feels like at the moment. I feel there's a kind of litany of problems that need addressed, some which can be dealt with in the short term and some which kind of feel a bit longer term. And that's a little bit concerning, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was, I think confusing was the word that you used and that sort of stood out for me. It's a bit baffling, some of it, to be honest with you, because last night, I think you expect maybe the sort of early surge from Falkirk. I think that was always coming, a night game, big game. They were always going to come out and be aggressive. And I think once Hibs kind of got to grips with the pace of the game, they started to control it. And I think mostly for the first half, I thought they were very good. I felt there was maybe a sort of slight change in the setup in terms of where the positions Jamie McGrath was picking up. I think he seemed to be playing a wee bit more as a sort of orthodox number 10, if you like, rather than that role that's really tends to have taken him out to the left-hand side. That there's been a sort of suspicion that maybe at times that can leave Hibs exposed a wee bit and a bit too easy to play through the middle when the ball turns over. And I think that largely for the first half it was good. He was picking up the ball in dangerous sort of central areas. He was getting turned. He was driving. He was trying to pick probing passes. Nicky Cadden was getting high up the pitch a lot. I thought I was impressed by Dan Barlasser. I thought he was, in this first half especially, he was good. He seemed like one of those guys who's always got time on the ball, never sort of flustered. He was switching the play well. And I thought, Falkirk had their moments. As I think you can expect that. And away games against a team that is aggressive, that does like to push forward and try and create chances. And again, but I just don't know where it went wrong after that, to be honest with you. Hibs a bit fortunate with the penalty. I would think it's one of those ones, if it goes against you, then you're probably you're up in arms about that. But again, if you compare it to the one against St Mirren, the Hibs didn't get a few weeks ago, they'll probably argue that they were due one on that front. And then the second goal goes in. McGrath, brilliant finish, really, really good finish. Just kind of what you would want to see from him in that position. And you think, okay, this is pretty good. This is more like the Hibs that we've come to know over the past however many months, going on 12 months almost now. But it's that the thing around about half time. It's bizarre, isn't it? And it does have echoes of last season a wee bit, in the sense that you kind of feel that the team now feel that it's coming. The same way that they did with the goals and stoppage time last year. I think obviously David Gray got asked about it earlier in the week, and he's right to say, I'd be naive not to address it, not to look at it. You kind of just sweep it under the carpet. But at the same time, I think managers kind of walk a wee bit of a tightrope with these things, and that they don't want to make too big a thing of it, and that then the players are then going onto the park with it in their heads. Mm-hmm. And by the time the sort of end of the half rolls around, they start to feel a wee bit jittery. But I think, up until just immediately before the goal, Hibs did look comfortable, and they looked very comfortable. And then it's just errors. I think it's Falkirk. They did look to get down that side. Ethan Williams, a good player, I thought, and they were always going to, I think, look to try and isolate him against Nicky Cadden, who we know is great going forward, but he's not a natural defender. And then once the ball comes into the box, Hibs just don't deal with it. And again, it's one of those things for a manager. You're kind of like, does David Gray really need to coach his players to how to deal with a simple cross into the box?
Apparently so.
Well, apparently so, but he shouldn't, is what I'm kind of getting at. And then from there, yeah, it just changes the entire, feel of the game. If Hibs go in 2-0 up, you can almost take a wee breath. But then there's probably, you're coming back out for the second half with a bit of tension already. And then the second goal is equally poor defending. So it's a kind of hard one to sort of puzzle out, isn't it? I'm taking it back to last season a wee bit. There are certainly elements that are quite clearly good. There are bits about it that suggest that in the long term this could be fine, but it's kind of clashes with what is actually unfolding in terms of just these kind of lapses. Is it lapses in concentration? Is it a belief thing? Is there nervousness? Like it's probably a difficult thing for a manager to try and fix, because if there are sort of glaring tactical issues, and there have been some, but I think there were steps maybe taken last night to try and address some of that. And then I think, based on the first half evidence, I think they're possibly quite effective. But I think David Gray's talked about it himself. Like, I think it was after one of the European games where he talks about situations unfolding in games and the way the game pans out, that where tactics just then go out the window. And it's all about, characters, mentality, how the players react and deal with situations in game. And I think it is probably, these ones are probably trickier for managers, I find, because it's not something necessarily that you can set up things on the training pitch to correct when it's in here, or it's do you know what I'm kind of getting at? It's a difficult one for them to address. But I suppose that if you're going to try and put a positive spin on it, then Hibs have shown last season that when they're in the sort of pits of adversity, they can come back and they can deal with that and they can overcome it. But I think, ideally nobody'd like to be in that situation in the first place.
No, you can't build a season on saying, right, well, we need to be really up against it before we can kind of turn it around. It's a heck of a plan to have. If it works, great. But I don't think you can be putting your fans through the ringer every season just for the sake of finishing third and getting into Europe. But no, it's what I thought was really interesting was I listened to John McGlynn last night speaking post-match, and he just came out and said, look, we're all aware that Hibs have struggled with conceding goals just before half-time. And he basically said, they spoke about that. He sort of told the players. So it's like it's becoming, if opposition teams are able to say, sort of final 5 minutes of the half plus stoppage time, just kind of go for it. You never know. Just kind of fling crosses into the box. Put the ball in there, just see what happens. And I think I suppose it's kind of the concerning thing really is that it doesn't, like I kind of said this before, but it doesn't really matter like which players are playing. It still seems to be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, again, Gray has said this as well. It's not the same players all the time, which was the problem last season. It was almost like, right, hands up who's not made a mistake. You're up this week. Whether it's a red card, whether it's giving away a penalty, whether it's a, giving possession away that leads to a goal, something like that. And that must be like all the more frustrating, because if you can sort of say, right, well, that player there has made 4 mistakes in the last 5 games, that's obvious. I just need to take them out of the team. I need to, bring somebody else in place of them, and hopefully that'll help iron out the problems. But I don't know whether it's a communication thing, whether it's people thinking, I don't need to go for that ball because someone else will be like, and it's in the net, or whether the keepers need to be more kind of commanding. It just feels like a kind of perfect storm of uncertainty. And, I suppose you look at Nico Raskin's goal at the weekend. That was just very much a case of Miguel Chaiwa just kind of switching off and losing his man. Mm-hmm. Which, is maybe when you hear David Gray talk about players needing development, he's still got room for improvement. He's still only 21. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where, you do need to be switched on all the time. And it just seems that, there's some players who aren't switched on all the time, and or something's not really working out. And, David Gray is understandably getting a bit of heat, a bit of flack from, supporters. Look at social media last night and this morning. A lot of references to him having credit in the bank for last season, which I think he does, but pointing out that, this can't sort of continue. sort of kind of feel like Mick McCarthy's going to pop up going, it can. But it's, there's only so much he can do. I mean, he can sort of, drill them on the training ground. He can tell them, this is how we do this is how we do that. But he can sort of, literally make players do a certain thing on the pitch. Like, they have to be taking responsibility and doing that themselves. And as we discussed, it doesn't seem to be the team selection. It just seems to be whoever's playing. So there just needs to be, I don't know, is it more leadership? Somebody just to maybe kind of, take a bit more responsibility on the pitch and say, this is how we do this is how we do that. Because when Martin Boyle plays, he has the armband. But I often wonder sometimes, do you need somebody at the back? Do you need a figure in defence wearing the armband just to, kind of ball at everyone and say, step up when you step up. You take him, you mark him. It seems very basic. As you said, you're not really expecting David Gray to have to tell people to stop a cross or how to defend, a corner, that sort of thing. But, I think it almost feels like that's what they're missing. It's just there needs to be somebody in the defence who will just bark orders and say, this is what we need to do. Like, just keep it simple, stupid.
Grant Hanley.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a very good shout. And I think the problem at the moment is, he can't be playing game to game because he hasn't had that full pre-season. And it's maybe, it's frustrating. It's the same with the striker issue. I mean, Hibs can't be finishing games with Junior Hoylett, Josh Campbell, and Thibaut Clichy as the front three, because, I mean, nothing against the players individually, but that's just not. It's not a forward line that is balanced. It's not got a mix of, for a start, you're asking, two midfielders really to play more attacking, and then I know we've seen Campbell do that. I know we've seen Hoylett do that, but I think last night in particular was sort of a really, really laid bare how kind of problematic it is that Hibs don't have another kind of big physical striker in the mould of Lyndon Dykes or Kurevic, someone like that. And I know, no sort of blame on the club for not managing to get the Dykes deal done. Obviously, very close to, to kind of coming to fruition until Piers Birmingham moved the goalposts. But, again, it's kind of left Hibs short up front. So they haven't replaced Kurevic. They haven't replaced Gale. They haven't replaced Miller, I would say, at the back as well. And they haven't replaced Triantis. And, very difficult players to replace like for like. But at the moment, it seems like almost trying to replace them with like an amalgamation of other roles hasn't worked yet. And that might change. We are still 5 games into the season. I think perhaps the European games, somebody said in the comments, the European games may be taking a toll. And it's, I mean, I'm still feeling the effects of traveling in Europe, but it was, nearly a month ago. So understandable if the players are. So I think it's one of those where it's a bit like last season, as we were saying. It feels like it's not far away from clicking, but it just needs to click. And right now, it's not really being able to sort of fathom what is going to make it click. Because David Gray talked about consistency of team selection, and we've not really seen that. There's like a few changes each game, and I think if you're changing players to suit certain opponents, that makes sense. But at the same time, you need I just think part of the reason why they had that successful run last season, 17 games unbeaten, was because it was mostly a consistent starting 11. But if somebody had to drop out, whoever was coming in could just pick up where they left off. And, the team wasn't weaker. It wasn't sort of less balanced or anything as a result. It was kind of seamless. And, maybe Hibs will get to that stage. Time will tell, I suppose. But I think, the sort of most damning thing about last night is that you're not all that surprised, by the outcome. Even with Hibs going 2-0 up, you just sort of thought, they really need another. They really need another. And I go back to Jamie McGrath's comments from after the Dundee United game, where you're saying you can't be scoring 3 or 4 goals every game to have a chance of winning it. That was the Dundee United game. They've played Rangers since. They played Falkirk since. And the words kind of ring true, particularly so from last night. And again, this is not to take anything away from Falkirk. I thought, some of their play was really good. Some of their defensive play was not very good. But it's, you almost feel like it's like McGlynn said, other managers will have highlighted this and they'll say, if we want to if we want to if we want to give ourselves the best chance of getting a result against Hibs, this is what we need to target. And you know what? You've probably got a very good chance of it coming off. And that's just, trying to get a goal before half time, because whether it's 0-0, whether Hibs are 1-0, whether, whatever the scoreline is, it just seems to completely rock Hibs' confidence. It seems to really kind of rip through the mentality and the team spirit. And then you get, then that's back-to-back second halves that have just been, pretty disappointing, pretty passive, pretty kind of nothing really.
Yeah.
And that for me is that's the biggest issue. Because last season, I think you might have seen a game like that, Hibs might have ended up winning it because they just had that sheer will to win. There was probably mentality on the Hibs side that meant, we've talked about Hibs never knowing when they're beaten. It kind of seems now it's like, they never know when they're winning. It sort of almost seems to have gone in reverse, and it just feels a bit like it's not obviously the exact same as last season, but we are seeing the same issues happening week in, week out, and until they're sorted, it just feels like it's just going to meander on like this.
Yeah.
And trips to Celtic and Hearts are not really what you want coming up next. But wouldn't it just be the Hibs way to get 6 points from those two fixtures?
Well, big games became a speciality last season, but I would agree that, I don't know if that's just, if I'd be overly optimistic to frame it that way over the next week, because there are issues in the team, as you're saying, and ones that you're maybe not wanting those particular two fixtures to come along. But David Gray will frame it as an opportunity to really get things going. Of course he will. That's the only way they can. That's the only way you can approach it, really. But I think from fans' perspective, there's certainly a bit of anxiety floating around, just like there is in the team. Obviously, he said about these goals around about half time and not wanting it to become a thing. But I think it's already past that point. Really, it is a thing. And again, but I just like coming back to it. It was. You mentioned the second half there, and again, that's two second halves in a row that I totally agree with. It's just been a kind of nothing performance from Hibs after the interval. I think last night, I think one of the most disappointing things is the sort of changes, as you said, that didn't really, the game wasn't flowing Hibs' way, and there was nothing really that happened after that was done that had any sort of significant bearing on swinging the game back in their favour, which again is a wee bit unlike, because I think Gray made a habit last season of making effective changes at good times, that if the game was getting away from him a wee bit, he was able to maybe shut it down, or if they needed a bit more aggression, if they needed another option. Hibs were good at that last season. Gray and the coaching staff, they had a kind of real run of game changing, making game changing changes, if you like. But again, last night I just felt the changes were a wee bit like for like. It was a wee bit kind of what you'd expect. Maybe something, I'm not too sure. I think Bowie having to come off, that sort of felt a bit by sort of necessity almost. He was walking a wee bit of a tightrope, I thought, on that yellow card. But then when you've got sort of Creedy and Boyle up top, as you've said, there's two guys who are very similar. Hibs have made the trademark to have that sort of big guy, wee guy up front, and it's worked. And it is, as you said, it sort of highlights the sort of gap that's been left by not being able to get somebody in who can complement Kieran Bowie. So I don't know. Again, not really the sort of position you want to be going into these next two games in. If we're going to try and take any positives from it, I think there is potentially, I don't know if you agree, there is potential in that midfield too with Barlasser and Chaiwa. I think, as I said, I thought Barlasser was good, kept the ball really well, good switches of play at times. Obviously, I think it was inevitable he was going to tire. Chaiwa brings something a bit different in terms of he covers the ground really well, Chaiwa. He's really, really quick. He's really, really aggressive. I think in terms of balance, there might be something in that going forward, but I think both players have got a bit of adjusting to do. Barlasser obviously to get a bit of match fitness, to get him up to full speed. Chaiwa, I think sometimes you can see his inexperience a wee bit.
Yes.
you can see he's technically good. What he does so well is when he sort of receives the ball with a man at his back, and somebody really kind of pressing him. He's so good at sort of dropping the shoulder, and he's got that wee change of pace to get away from a man. He did it a few times last night, and it didn't seem to matter who, and the Falkirk team was trying to press him. He's just got that wee sort of switch he can flick, drops the shoulder and he's away. He's really good at that, but in other times he's maybe a wee bit, it almost seems to weird, like framing this as a negative, but just almost like too over enthusiastic at times. Trying it, it's like, sometimes they talk about players like they're trying too hard to make something happen. He's a wee bit like that, I think. Whether that's in possession sometimes, or maybe can do something a wee bit rash with a pass, or if it's out of possession, just being a wee bit too overeager. I think he's still got a bit of that about him. But I think in terms of going forward, there's maybe a bit of potential there. You can see Barlasser's got a lot of experience in how he plays the game. Positionally, I thought he was good as well. There's certainly a wee bit of promise there. Maybe just a wee bit of patience required until the two of them get used to playing with each other. The two of them get fully up to speed. There's certainly something there. I did prefer McGrath in the more orthodox 10 role. So if we're going to look at positives, I think that's where I'm looking at the moment. There's certainly something there. I think with those three. First half, still a lot of chances being created. Again, you'd be far more concerned if they weren't. But I think just going into these next two games, I don't know, Celtic Park. How do you approach this on Saturday? Because obviously, it's since 2010, Hibs have gone without a win there. It's not I wouldn't say it's a Celtic team that's firing on all cylinders by any means. But how do Hibs try and approach it? Do you think the approach that they went with at Ibrox, which we've talked about that to death, to be honest, about how kind of passive it was at times. Is that really going to fly with supporters if they go and do that again? You can try and sit off. Do they need to try and be aggressive? But then that runs the risk of getting Celtic just picking you off. There's no easy decisions to be made going into a game like this in this kind of form, is there?
There's not, no. And I think we talk about David Gray changing the team. We talk about not really having a settled back three or midfield. But I think worth pointing out that I think more often than not last season, particularly going to Celtic Park, that was when he did change things. That was when he did. Not kind of wholesale changes, not like a huge departure, but rather than it being a back three, it was very much a back five. And maybe kind of going with it was almost more like a kind of 5-3-1-1 type formation at times. So I think, a lot of that does depend on who he's got available, who he thinks, is well suited to the game. I don't know if we see Josh Campbell coming back in for, his energy, but then, who do you drop instead of him? Do you kind of go with one centre forward and have McGrath in that sort of supporting striker role? There's a lot to it. Or do you keep him in the midfield three? There's so much to think about. And I think the way things have been going, it's very possible to overthink it. As you say, Hibs have gone so long without a victory at Celtic Park, and there was a time when Hibs were going there, I think under, maybe kind of under Neil Lennon most recently, where they were kind of taking the game to Celtic. They did have a go. They did have players who, if kind of every Hibs player was sort of at the top of their game, and if Celtic had a bit of an off day, then there was always that chance that there were a couple of kind of drawn games or games where Hibs really ran Celtic close. And I think, I think you kind of need to have that sort of mentality going into it. David Gray talks about it. He talks about that belief, believing you can go and win there, which I don't think we really saw an awful lot of on Saturday for a start. And it's the thing is that we got the same questions, or David Gray got the same questions in the lead up to the Rangers game. With the kind of the unrest amongst the fans, the kind of support kind of turning against Russell Martin, things like that. It's kind of a bit similar with the whole Celtic situation. Their fans aren't happy with the boards. They look at their transfer window. To the extent that Brendan Rodgers was speaking about that. How that kind of the impact really, and just how they want to put that behind them, kind of focus on doing well in the Europa League and obviously domestically. And, you look at them having a European game this week and you think, is that, could that potentially, be a benefit for Hibs, because Hibs will have that sort of like extra day's rest kind of thing. But I don't think that really comes into it. I think it's more about finding a team and a system that works, that's going to give you the best chance of, just being competitive, I think. Because we can sort of like, we can put too much focus on, how do you win a game like this? Whereas I think it really needs to be like, how do you compete in a game like this? Because we've seen countless Hibs teams go to Celtic Park under different managers, and just, it's been pretty brutal to watch at times. Either there's been a naivety because they're just not kind of, completely clued in as to how Celtic play at home, especially when they're, kind of really, really going great guns. As you said, I'm not sure they are at the moment, but quite often there's been times you think Hibs should have a good chance in this game. Maybe Celtic have had a European game in midweek. Maybe they're not kind of, doing great domestically, but, they always sort of find a way to, to get goals, to get 3 points, occasionally aided by, Hibs, if we're honest. So there's an awful lot going into this game. And, the players will probably be saying, it's good to have a game coming so quickly after the last one. The games don't come any bigger than this. It's a good one to focus on. But I don't know whether, I don't know whether it is particularly helpful to have a game like this to follow up from. I think if it is a confidence issue, I think Hibs need to do something to kind of restore that confidence. Even if they don't win on Saturday, if it's a good performance, then that is something to build on. The only problem, I think, is that from what we've seen so far, there's not an awful lot to suggest that we're going to see that. And I think that's the issue. And then with Hearts coming up afterwards and how well they're doing, and how sort of experienced Derek McInnes is in the Scottish Premiership. He's faced Hibs numerous times. And that's a little bit of a concern as well. Obviously, the management, the team will be focusing on Celtic and Celtic only. And then once that game's out the way, you can look ahead to Hearts. But I think the fact that we're sitting here on Wednesday, the game's on Saturday, and we're thinking, not really sure how they're going to set up. You're not really sure who's going to play. That in itself is, kind of tells you something, I think. And right now, I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what team I would pick. David Gray sees them in training. He knows who's sort of best suited for these types of games. He knows who's suited best for certain roles. And I suppose there is a certain degree of kind of trusting the decisions that he makes, but at the same time, you then need a lot more from the players. And going away to Celtic, it's a big stage. It's a chance to kind of prove that last season wasn't a flash in the pan, that they are over Europe, that they can sort of cut out the silly mistakes. So a big opportunity on Saturday, and one that hopefully Hibs will grab with both hands.
Yeah, I think what you said there kind of sums up just the general situation at the moment with Hibs, and it is, we're just not sure. We're just not sure. Is it going to be all right in the long run? Personally, I still think so, but you can't be certain. And I think we just have to wait and see how it pans out over the next week or so. It is a big kind of week and a bit now coming for Hibs. Two huge games that, I mean, it might seem daunting on paper, and I suppose in current form maybe, although I don't think anybody would like to have going to Tynecastle described as daunting, but certainly Celtic Park is the biggest challenge you can face in the league. But it could be, again, it could be the spark that Hibs need to get things going again, because at the moment it's just not quite clicking. Despite some promising signs, despite some not so promising signs. But I think for this morning, we're going to leave it there. We'll park last night and look ahead to Saturday's game against Celtic, a chance to get back on track. Thanks for joining us, folks. Hope you have a good rest of the week, and we'll speak to you again very, very soon. Cheers.